Good evening. If everyone could please join us, that would be great. Welcome everyone to our Federal Policy Institute reception. I'm Lauren Duncan, a proud 2023 graduate of the Mental Health Counseling Program at Teachers College. As Teachers College Community Engagement Officer, I'm part of the Alumni team, which connects more than 95,000 TC alumni around the world. I am thrilled to return to the historic National Press Club with our DC alumni, esteemed faculty and administration, and of course the FPI students for the TC's annual reception to coincide with Professor Lynn Kagan's Federal Policy Institute. Tonight, we will continue TC's commitment to hosting a diversity of perspectives. We're happy to say welcome back to Provost KerryAnn O'Mara, and of course, we'd like to express our appreciation to TC Professor Kagan for her leadership in this program. I know we're all excited to begin, so let me share a few words about TC's Provost. Provost KerryAnn O'Mara is the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Provost, and Dean of the College at Teachers College Columbia University. She is a professor in the Higher Ed and Post-Secondary Education program in the Organization and Leadership Department. KerryAnn's scholarship focuses on creating a more diverse and inclusive academic workplace. She has designed, tested, and shared evidence-based strategies to remove barriers and improve full participation for women and scholars from racially minoritized groups, with particular attention to hiring faculty, retention, workload, and evaluation, and has received continuous funding from the National Science Foundation since 2010. Let's welcome her now, Provost KerryAnn O'Mara.
Oh my goodness, we're moving here. Good evening, everyone. Did I do that? Are we all hearing the... What's wrong? Should I turn it off? Hello? Yes! All right. So welcome, everyone. As Lauren said, my name is KerryAnn O'Mara. I'm so proud to be the Provost of Teachers College. And I know that many of you were expecting our president, President Tom Bailey, who loves this event. He would have been around the room talking to every single person in the room, as well as meeting alum. Unfortunately, he's ill. He's going to be fine, but he had a fever and he needed to stay back. So I am sharing his good wishes on behalf of TC. I also want to take a moment to thank all of those who worked so hard to organize the Federal Policy Institute and this reception at the National Press Club. Let's just take a moment to think about where we are, right? This is a place where ideas have been debated, translated, news has been broken that has impacted us all. And this Federal Policy Institute is really a signature program for TC, one that we're hoping, as we've spoken to Dr. Kagan about, to replicate in multiple areas across the college just because of the impact that it's had, which would be hard to do, but I've certainly got my eyes on the goal. And in particular, it's important because we get to understand the particular nature, but also more broadly, how scholarship and perseverance, the everyday plotting and showing up and working on policy, and how that can make a difference. We're really proud of the work our faculty, our institutes and centers, our academic staff do to generate new knowledge that has an immediate impact on the education and health of our country. But equally so, our definition of success, our victory lap, if you would have it, is seeing the change that our TC alum are able to make in the world. And I've just loved talking with you. And I only was able to get to a certain number of groups. But DC is a very special place to see that because of the fact that so much of what happens in policy and in this area and the DMV affects opportunities in the US and around the world. Think about the $200 billion since COVID that was invested in education, and the fact that within this area, those decisions were made, whether or not to provide payrolls for teachers, to help schools go remote in early days after COVID and through COVID, and the free lunch programs. Think about all those impacts that were decided within miles of where we are and then would have been announced in places like this. And being here in DC is familiar to me because I actually worked at the University of Maryland in College Park for 16 years. And our higher education students would graduate and go to 1 DuPont Circle, work on the Hill in places like IHEP or in various alphabet soup names of associations that work in higher ed. You've clearly picked up on a number of the alphabet soup acronyms. And in fact, my husband works in education policy in OSEP, in the Office of Special Education Programs. And so what's happening with the Individuals with Disabilities Act, appropriations, writing, guidance. He's now working on the intersection of education and Medicaid funding. This is all dinner conversation and pretty normal in our house. So as you know, I'm also here to sort of give the welcome context from TC. Was founded in 1887 to improve the life chances of immigrant women at its core. As we think about where we find ourselves in 2025, it's important to remember this founding and intention. TC founders believe deeply that educational opportunity is connected to physical and mental health, to income and resources, and identity. The idea was that a holistic education would be transformative in a holistic approach to education, not just for individuals, but for society. That holistic, integrated understanding of the power of education, when understood in the context of other opportunities with an abiding commitment to social justice, still deeply shapes the interests of our students, such as the ones that are here today. And what an impressive group of people you are. I just have to say, really, every single one. And you know, there are many ways in which TC interacts with federal policymaking. I've just given an example that affected communities around the country in terms of a variety of those acts. But also, our faculty impact policy through their research and their scholarship and the graduation of the next generation of thinkers and policymakers. So just a couple of examples. The Community College Research Center recently has been very influential in advancing policy to New York State around dual enrollment, and particularly dual enrollment from high school to college for low-income students who otherwise wouldn't have access because you have to pay for those classes and they're expensive. And that's advancing, and hopefully we picked up by the governor's initiative. Many of you are probably familiar with Professor Kim Noble's Baby's First Year project, which showed a link between payments to mothers in poverty and their infants' brain development. And Professor Noble testified about the impact of early childhood tax credit in New York, and the state shortly afterward passed that tax credit. In many cases, the U.S. Department of Education, NIH, NSF, NEH, will fund TC scholars, many of the faculty that some of you had that you've been telling me about as alum or currently, who study critically needed research areas. So for example, there's a recent large grant that will prepare school psychologists to provide evidence-based, culturally informed mental health services to culturally and linguistically diverse youth in our local District 4 and 5. As we know, there's significant learning loss and as well as chronic absenteeism that affect youth, and these kinds of mental health supports, which are often not available in minoritized communities, are so important. Many of us are familiar with the fact that with a day in which, whether in our children's classroom or our own classroom growing up, somebody gets sent to the principal's office. Well, the Department of Ed keeps track of suspensions and folks that are moved through the discipline system. And that data is analyzed by faculty, such as ours, that shows a disproportionate movement through disciplinary systems for Black students, for students with disabilities, and other groups of students. So one of our professors, Dr. Collier Meeks, is actually working to provide school-based interventions with teachers so they understand those discretionary moments. so they can enact and not send someone to the principal's office, but actually keep them and engage them in the class. So you might be getting the idea that I'm proud to be a teacher's college and want you to be proud of it as well. Whether you graduated from TC, are a student now, are one of our dear friends, there is much to be proud of and excited about moving forward. President Bailey's public good initiative is ensuring we're accelerating our impact in key areas of national interest, including mental health, teacher education and literacy, sustainability, and AI in education. We're currently in the final stages of 6 new searches, 2 in literacy, and 2 positions and positions as well in anthropology and education, learning technologies, music, and clinical psychology. We're looking for both students and for faculty who ask the big questions that affect our classrooms, our healthcare, our psychologists, and what's happening in mental health. We have created a new entity called TC Academy that hopes to extend our professional development opportunities, just held a new winter session, hired a new vice dean of teacher education we're really excited about, and so on many levels we're on the move. Since joining TC, I've really been blown away by the enormous amount of talent in our community, which is so evident here tonight, as well as in our network, and the impact that our alum are having in the world. With that talent and the profound legacy that has been handed to us by such an important institution in the world, I know we're ready to hold fast and commit our minds and our voices to the needs of 2025. So on that note, let me thank Professor Kagan for putting together this outstanding program. And thanks also to our student participants, our alumni guests, and our speaker, Senior Fellow Preston Cooper from the American Enterprise Institute, for being with us today. I also want to acknowledge TC's Alumni and Government Relations team, Matt Camp and Lauren Duncan, for putting together this wonderful reception. I know you've had rich experiences, despite a few obstacles like snowstorms. Of course, tomorrow's day of mourning for President Jimmy Carter. So I thank you all for persevering, which is of course also good experience to have as you go about affecting change. So let me now introduce Professor Sharon Lynn Kagan to lead us through the rest of the program. Dr. Kagan is the Virginia and Leonard Marks Professor of Early Childhood and Family Policy, co-director of the National Center for Children and Families at Teachers College, Columbia University, and an adjunct professor at Yale University's Child Study Center. She has helped shape early childhood practice and policies in the United States and in countries throughout the world. Author of 225 and counting articles and 13 books, her research focuses on the institutions that impact child and family life. Dr. Kagan was made a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, AERA, in 2010, and was inducted into the National Academy of Education in 2012. This is a really big deal for anybody who understands the National Academy of Education, as well as her many honors. She works to improve the design and quality of early childhood policies by consulting with the White House, including across multiple generations of folks in those roles, federal and state agencies, elected and appointed policymakers, including governors, members of Congress and legislatures, foundations, and corporations. Her work has had a profound impact on when, how, and how much our children learn in their earliest years, and we are so grateful to have her leading early childhood policy expertise and education at TC. Dr. Kagan.
Well, hi. Provost O'Meara, thank you for that lovely introduction and for being here and being a supporter of our work. Students, to you, thank you for being here. Alums, of course, and all of our distinguished guests. I've got 2 jobs tonight. Both of them are joyous. The first is talking a little bit about the Federal Policy Institute, and the second is introducing our most distinguished guest speaker, whom we are thrilled to welcome to the TC community, actually the TC family. Let me begin with a couple of words about the Federal Policy Institute. Could I just see a show of hands of people in the room, including students who are currently enrolled? How many of you have taken or been a part of the Federal Policy Institute? Okay, everybody, look around. So amongst our alums, this is really, really joyous. Well, I hope this isn't too redundant for all of you, but for those who are not familiar, we do really want to share about it. FPI really does share a lot of goals with our sister courses at TC. We work on discerning various theories, thinking about their applications, understanding different conceptualization of politics and of policy, and of addressing key policy themes that are the most trenchant today. But it is also stunningly different. It's weird. It's designed to be a hands-on and a hearts-in experience. It's also designed to hone our policy skills, to help us be much more expert at being precise and concise, at asking succinct questions, and of learning how to optimize our time with policymakers who are only used to the 3-minute elevator speech, not the 40-page dissertation that indeed we all write. We are interested in understanding the nuts and bolts of policy, what really does make it work and what doesn't make it work. FPI is really quirky, and it takes only the strong support of an administration like what we have at TC to make this thing become a reality. So let's start. Half of it takes place at TC, half of it here, which means the institution is absorbing all kinds of liabilities and risks for our being here, right? Half of it takes place in the first semester and in the second semester, which absolutely drives our registrar crazy every year because your grades don't get turned in at the end of the first. The graduates are all nodding. They know this drill. Also, I think that many of the courses at TC really they focus on understanding paradigms, on understanding diverse conceptualizations that others have written. This course is really different. We focus on asking questions. We focus on generating the kind of spirited inquiry that will put some of our speakers on the spot, that indeed will enable them to wish they could pass on some of these questions. We ask provocative questions. We ask sensitive questions. Questions like, what is education really like in a democratic enterprise, and how does that vary from a more socialist enterprise, or how does that differ from a regime that is run by a benevolent dictator? How indeed do you make change, and how does it differ? We ask about the role of politics in education, and I'll say a little bit more about that because it has characterized our full week here. We examine dialectics. Has the policy process as we know it become so totally porous with everybody influencing policy that indeed sometimes we get into policy gridlock, that policy gets incapacitated? Or indeed, is this the role of influencing policy in a democracy? This week we've been asking a whole lot about, are the policy guardrails that have been put in place to protect education as a viable bedrock of our enterprise, are they strong? Are they strong enough to withstand various changes? We've been examining what accelerates policy, what impedes policy. Is policy effective? How do we know? Are our current accountability systems measuring the right things, student output? Should we be looking at other things? We have been actually questioning what constitutes education, because as we consider the trenchant challenges that students around our country face, we understand that they traverse numerous disciplines. Today, for the first time, spurred on, and I want to give a real shout out to Michelle Leslie Blackwell for really bringing to our fore a panel on insecurities. So we talked a lot about housing insecurity, about economic insecurity, about transportation insecurity, and food insecurity. So suddenly, when you're hearing recommendations about, do we tack these on to educational pieces of legislation? Do we think of other strategies? How do we integrate them? These are really potent and very, very real policy questions. How do we do this? How do we do it? Well, we hear from about 45 people of very different policy persuasions, including representatives of the White House, the Department of Ed, and HHS. We actually go to the United States Senate. We have representatives from the Senate. We hear from people who are policy advisors, people who are employed as personal and committee staff on the Hill. We hear from think tanks, from research institutions, from advocates, and from representatives of teacher unions. We have recently added important session on the budget and on the courts, not easy to understand in terms of their roles, but we really do understand that these processes are absolutely seminal in influencing and contouring policy. We, this year, had some very special things happen. We were treated, one serendipitously and one planned, to private, off-the-record, and very confidential conversations. One was a dialogue with the person who was head of education for the President's Domestic Policy Council. Yesterday, when she spoke with us, it was her second to last day in office. We also today had a very long session at the Heritage Foundation with Lindsay Burke, who many of you may know is the author of the 2025, the highly influential 2025 report on education. We were able to probe her very confidentially. There were a few questions that she passed on, which actually we've been talking about. Those themselves are pretty informative, what she elected to share with us and what she did not. I think the point of this is that we address mixed topics, we use mixed modalities, and we also are very, very conscious to have diverse ideologies represented. Now, I want to talk about this year because this has been the most exceptional year for doing FPI literally on record. Yes, it is a transition year, but may I remind you, we've been doing this for 25 years. We've dealt with transitions. We actually do know how to do that. We did add a special session on what it means to be on a transition team, although there is some ambiguity as to whether or not it actually is in existence right now. We're probing that. Yes, we've been here in the midst of snowstorms and rainstorms. We're pretty good at weathering, pardon the pun on that. We've actually not been here at a time when there have been presidential memorials, and certainly not at a time when we are memorializing someone who is of such moral and ethical standards at a time when I think most of us are calling for a greater focus on morals and ethics in the political polity of this country. I would say that it is a time of turmoil. It is a time of ambiguity. We press, and I'm really going to be interested, as all of us will, in your comments, because it's been hard to do predictions. We always like to ask, well, what do you think will happen? And people have been a little bit shy about answering this. But I do want to share with you some of the lessons, and this is actually for the alums. Part of the reason I've been told that alums come back is just sort of hear, well, what are people gleaning now? So I've got 9 things I want to share with you. Okay, and I'm sure the students will have other things to tell you, but the first is that there is an urgent need to focus on topics that are at the cutting edge. Over and over and over, we heard about the need to look at AI and the need to do it very, very systematically. Over and over, we have heard about the need to really address privatization and choice. We know that that will be accelerated, but we're really not quite sure about how, and so we need to focus attention on that. We've also learned that we need to look at the student loan process, and we're going to hear a little bit about that in just a few minutes, and also student forgiveness, something that is obviously on the minds and hearts of everybody who is in this room. So, topics that are seminal, that are important, we heard about. The second thing is that we really need to address trends that may have been a little bit under the radar, but that are actually becoming crystallized as we speak. One of those trends is the entire deprofessionalization of the educational enterprise, and the students heard an entire session about that. They can talk with you about it. The second is there is a new discipline emerging called intellectual humility, and we've learned about trying to understand that a little bit better. Third, we have this new entity, although it is labeled a department, it isn't really one, called DOGE, and we are very, very concerned about what it will do regarding efficiencies to the educational enterprise. There is no question that it will have an impact. So there are really current trends we've got to focus on. Third, and however important these are, these really pale by the concerns that we have about preserving our multiracial democracy. I think we all would agree that we have made important strides on DEI. We have made important strides advanced by the Office of Civil Rights. And indeed, these issues are threatened. They are threatened in part in language, and they are threatened in usage. So there are huge concerns there. Next, I want to say to you that we sort of ask our speakers, what do you think is really going to happen, or what's the best thing that could happen? And some of our speakers said that, well, at these times, the best thing that could happen to the educational enterprise in our country is that we remain stable, that we hold on to what we have achieved. Contrast that, however, with the strategy from outgoing federal education appointees who are leaving their jobs on January 17th, who say, no, that is absolutely not good enough. We have got to be active. We have got to promote targeted letter writing campaigns, the mobilization of advocates, and we need to speak out ferociously with stronger voices than ever before. Those are two distinct approaches to how indeed we deal with this. We also have heard, I think this is number 5, reflections very candidly about what the Biden administration did well and what it could have done better. I'm going to share what they told us about what they could have done better. They said that educational success is the best kept secret in America, and that if indeed people who are leaving government had the opportunity to do it again, they would focus much more on communicating the things that have been happening in education that are positive. Our press, our media, and our social media tend to exploit the negatives at the risk of avoiding the many, many positive things. They say that the educational accomplishments of the Biden administration are indeed the best kept secrets. And then we ask them, and so what are your oh darn it's? And by that I mean, oh darn it, what do I wish that we would have done, that we would have addressed? And they say that school attendance and chronic absenteeism came up over and over again as an issue because of its salient value for students directly, but also because it embraces if you're going to address that, you have to embrace the multiple issues that we deal with: health issues, housing issues, economic issues, civil rights issues. And so that was a very big number one regret. We also heard about, actually we didn't hear about, our students, and I thank them for this, identified the absence of teacher voice and parent voice in much of the discourse that took place. We did get answers to it because we always give time for students to ask questions, and indeed it was a recurring theme, but it is very interesting. We get so hooked up in the policy world and in the acronyms that sometimes we forget about what is really, really close at heart and very important. We also heard about the need for a new visioning on accountability. I mentioned that a moment ago, but I want to stress that. Nobody feels we've done accountability well. They felt we did it terribly under NCLB. They're not sure that we've made a whole lot of improvement under ESSA. And as we all know, it is those signature pieces of legislation that influence the provision of cascading pieces of legislation. And the consequence of not doing it well is that while we're relying on data more and more, and while data is more has been proliferated more greatly, the reality is that we're not sure what's going in on the data. We're not sure what we're getting on children. Are we really measuring what matters? Of course it matters to collect data on reading and mathematics, but there are other more important things, or as important things, that need to be measured as well. How do we measure curiosity, motivation, and how do we address the role of teachers and the role of institutions? We also heard some good news. We also found that although this is a very controversial time, there are potential areas of policy agreement for this administration. Students aside, anybody want to take a guess on what we heard? Where can we come together? Come on, former FPIers, I'm counting on you.
I'm thinking workforce and workforce strategy.
You're excellent. One area is the relationship of career and technical education, which is how do we prepare a diversified workforce for important roles that will be self-sustaining and economically viable. A couple others. What are
Financial aid for short-term credentials.
that one actually did not come up. At least, did we hear that at all, anybody? No, I don't think so. Here's what we did hear. We did hear that there has got to be a lot more work on AI and technology, and that there is appetite across the aisle on that. And we also heard, interestingly, that child tax credits are a potent elixir of social change that actually has appeal across the aisle because, indeed, there are workforce issues that are related to that. So, yeah, pretty close, Marianne. Anyway, I want to say that, and this is my final point, that on our opening day, there was a very sobering comment made, and some of the people who have the benefit of maturity and age in this room will recognize this. We were reminded that in the complexity of the times today, there is very little actual space that is devoted to education. We appear far less frequently in the inaugural and State of the State addresses from the National Governors Association. That indeed, and we've got somebody who worked here who's nodding her head. Thank you, Tiffany. There is really concern that in the cascade of important issues that are facing our country today, there's more silence on education than there should be, and that part of the call for our students, and indeed for all of us, is to make sure that education gets recentered, not only as the bedrock institution of democracy, but as the center of the American economy. Arguably, there has never been a greater need for educational leaders today. And I want to say that we have heard in the course of our time in Washington from fabulous educational leaders. Many of them have been graduates of Teachers College. I've got chills are running up my body as I'm saying this. I do. And many of them, more chills are coming, and many of them actually were products of FPI and noted that FPI really induced them into policy. So what I want to say to you is that the students, and students get ready, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, but the students who are before us are our best hope. They are what makes our hearts shine. They are the light of our future. Some of them, this experience may so turn them off of D.C. that they'll never come back to the city, particularly because you don't know how to plow your snow off the streets. Some of them, however, will be very, very turned on to federal roles. Others may be really desirous of moving toward states, because we know that the action is going to be at the states. Others will follow Iris and will really go into work actually on Capitol Hill and take it on to work in the Congress. I want to say that, and this is to the students, we've had very, very good students in FPI. We have wonderful students at Teachers College, but I want you to know that you will always have a very special place in my heart and in the hearts of those who have planned this, because not only of your intelligence, your curiosity, but because of your flexibility and your graciousness, and you're willing to have patience with us through what has been an extraordinary, challenging week to organize. The planning team, and I will introduce them all in just a moment, but you need to know that we really, really, and I'm looking at each and every one of you, we really appreciate your spirit and the way you have grasped on to making it through the week with us. I want you all to see who these students, these remarkable students are. And so students, I'm going to ask you to stand and come up to the podium. Really quickly.
Just hide it behind something.
Okay, so come on, hurry up. Hurry up, hurry up. You behind me? Okay, all right, you're right behind me. Okay, so there's a little joke amongst these FPIers, and you guys think I don't really know it, but I know you think I'm really bitchy about time, and I am. And that I'm really rigid about keeping your questions succinct, and yes, I am. So here you go. In one word, oh no, yes. In one word, what has this week thus far, and we've got 2 more days to go, been like for you? This is rapid fire. Start. One word.
Creative, transformative, thought-provoking, inspiring.
Inspiring, hopeful,
Inspiring, transformative,
Inspirational.
confirmation.
Informative.
Enlightening.
Okay, keep going.
Inspirational.
Good. Wow. Interesting. That's what my kids say to me when I cook a bad meal. Go ahead. Go ahead.
exhilarating,
Insightful, self-discovery, transformative,
Okay, let's go. Yeah.
invigorating,
Invigorating. I haven't heard exhausting yet. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, too.
Eye-opening, yeah.
spectacular,
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. We don't know how, but all right, we will all explore you on how. All right, so here's what you've got, guys. You've got people who are committed to making social change, people who are committed to making our world better, and people who have the energy, the patience, the wisdom, and the creativity to do that. So these are our 2025 FPIers, and I couldn't be more proud and more appreciative of literally each and every one of you. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, you can sit down, and you were really good. You did it. One word. I'm really proud of you. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, shh, we're not done yet, guys. Okay. Teachers College should be very proud that it allows and creates space for a course that is as quirky as this. And we owe a huge thanks to our administration, who have, over 25 years, remained staunchly committed to our work. More significantly, we should know and be proud of our institution, and this is really to the alums, because we've created a legacy, the institution has created a legacy and a history, and that in addition to the 30 students that you saw here, we are home to the most promising professional committed faculty, and many of you know I was at another institution for a very, very long time. TC has got the most committed faculty possible. We have the most committed administrators possible. And I just want to say that I think we all should count our lucky stars to be part of this family. We are very, very lucky. I just want to say that none of this would happen without not only the incredible support from our institution, but we partner with a simply magical team from the Institute for Educational Leadership. And I would like those from IEL to please stand, and I would want to just acknowledge them by name. Eddie Cohn, who is the president, is standing right now. Helen Malone, who has worked for tireless years on this and helps run IEL. And this year's architects, orchestrators of FPI, we couldn't possibly have done any of this without Michelle Leslie Blackburn. Michelle, where are you? Michelle Leslie Blackburn. And is Maddie in the room? Maddie Park? Maddie? There's Maddie. Oh, good. Hi. There's a bright light. Thank you, Maddie. And finally, I would be very remiss if I didn't acknowledge two of the most wonderful people on the planet. Those are the people from TC who I am lucky enough to get to work with all the time. Everyone who knows Trevor Basin, Trevor, stand up. And everybody who knows and gets to work with Sarah Etzel. Sarah, stand up. So with these two remarkable people, I'm really honored and thrilled to be able to teach this course this year. I'm also honored and thrilled to be able to introduce our speaker. Thank you for sitting through all of that. It's going to be a joy to have Preston Cooper with us. Preston is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, or AEI, where his work focuses at the intersection of so many of the issues that I said we really need to be concerned about: higher education, return on investment, student loans, how we reform higher education. He's here to talk with us openly and honestly about what the future holds in these particular areas. He's well equipped to do that. Before he came to AEI, he was a senior fellow in education and higher policy at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. He also was a research analyst at the American Enterprise Institute and a policy analyst at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research. This man knows his way around think tanks, around research, and around higher ed. But beyond that, he is a public scholar because his work has been noted in the popular press, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Forbes, Fortune, RealClearPolicy, and the National Review. So we have a thinker, a scholar, and a doer. He has his PhD from George Mason University and his bachelor degree from one of my favorite places in the world, Swarthmore College. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Preston Cooper, and we can't wait to hear what you're going to say.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kagan, for that lovely introduction, and thank you to Matt Camp and the rest of your team for putting this event together and for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So I've been asked tonight to talk a little bit about federal policy and what we can expect over the next 4 years. I should get a disclaimer out of the way up front that I'm not involved with the transition team at all. I have no special insight. This is all just speculation, but I'd like to think informed speculation. But if I'm wrong about all this, you can invite me back in 4 years and laugh at me. So when I applied to college back in 2010, a 58% majority of Republicans said that colleges and universities were having a positive impact on the way things were going in the country, according to the Pew Research Center. Today, only 31% of Republicans say the same. And that loss of confidence is only one among many challenges that we see in the higher education system right now. We've also seen sharp drops in college enrollment, a chaotic student loan system, and an outbreak of anti-Semitic extremism on many college campuses. These problems have led to a new development, a significant rise in the salience of higher education reform as an issue for Republicans. Republican leaders in the House and Senate have endorsed sweeping bills to overhaul the federal role in higher education policy. President-elect Donald Trump campaigned on what were once niche issues in higher education, such as accreditation reform. It's safe to say that higher education is going to be a key focus of President-elect Trump's second term. I'll start by discussing what we might see from the Trump administration itself, and then I'll move on to some reforms that could pass through Congress. So I was surprised to see on the campaign trail that President-elect Trump made an issue out of the accreditation system. Accreditation reform has always been near and dear to the hearts of higher education wonks such as myself, but it rarely featured in national political debates. In 2023, though, President-elect Trump pledged to, quote, fire the radical left accreditors and accept applications for new accreditors who will impose real standards on colleges once and for all, end quote. Trump is correct to identify accreditors as a key to a higher education reform more broadly. Colleges must have accreditation to access federal funding, and in most cases, simply to exist. This gives accreditors enormous power over how colleges operate, since their veto can be a school's death knell. Moreover, there's scant evidence that accreditors are actually effectively ensuring quality at their colleges. With control of the education department, the new administration could accelerate the recognition of new accreditors. Colleges could then seek recognition from these entities instead of the legacy accreditation agencies. That sort of competition might reduce some of the regulatory constraints we see in higher education and hopefully promote innovation at the college level. But opening the market to new accreditors might go hand in hand with a tougher line on existing colleges that are not meeting the standards that government officials expect of them. The new administration will have many tools at their disposal to hold schools accountable for misconduct. Schools which have failed to adequately protect Jewish students from harassment and violence in the wake of the October 7th massacre could be investigated by the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights, with fines or potentially a loss of federal funding being possible consequences. The administration might also levy fines against institutions which have made misrepresentations to their students by submitting false data to college ranking services, such as the U.S. News and World Report. An even bolder strategy might utilize a regulation known as borrower defense to repayment. Borrower defense allows students who are victims of misconduct by their colleges to have their federal loans discharged, and the department can then recoup those discharged amounts from institutions themselves. In the past, this has mostly been used against for-profit colleges, but there's no reason the Trump administration couldn't turn borrower defense against wealthy nonprofit schools that have made misrepresentations to their students. Finally, we might expect the new administration to issue regulations tightening the spigot of federal student loan funding. Some universities have abused the easy availability of federal loans to offer wildly expensive degrees that do not justify their costs. Even Columbia has fallen prey to this. Columbia has offered a master's degree in film funded by taxpayer-backed loans that leaves students with an average of $180,000 in debt against an annual starting salary of only $30,000. The Trump administration may judge that allowing such programs to continue is not in the interest of students or taxpayers. The Higher Education Act requires the Secretary of Education to ensure institutions using federal loans are upholding high standards of quality. However, previous secretaries have neglected this critical duty. Secretary of Education designate Linda McMahon could use this authority to stop the flow of federal student loans to colleges that leave students with excessive debt burdens or unacceptably low earnings. Of course, the Education Department is not the only entity that matters. Republican control of both houses of Congress has the potential to deliver sweeping higher education reform. During President Trump's first term, he signed a modest tax on the endowments of wealthy universities into law. Research has found that larger endowments generally do not lead institutions to expand enrollment or admit more students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Endowment returns do provide universities with more resources, but the endowment tax only affects a few dozen ultra-wealthy institutions where the returns to that marginal dollar are low. Expanding the endowment tax is a logical priority for Trump's second term. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has introduced legislation in the Senate to raise the tax on wealthy universities' endowment income from 1.4% to 35%. Congress could tap this revenue stream to pay for specific education initiatives. In particular, lawmakers might use the endowment tax revenue to expand financial assistance for students who are not pursuing four-year college degrees. Tax Columbia to fund the working class is a message that will resonate. It's also possible that we'll see comprehensive changes to federal student loans. The Republican leaders of the House and Senate Education Committees last Congress both introduced sweeping bills to overhaul the federal student loan system, which is currently on track to lose $400 billion over the next 10 years. Exactly what will be proposed is still up in the air, but some likely possibilities can include strict limits on federal lending, especially to graduate students, who can currently borrow effectively unlimited amounts from the federal government. This will save taxpayers money, as colleges will no longer be able to charge excessive prices for graduate degrees and pass the costs on to taxpayers. It's a promising way to bring down tuition. President Biden's changes to the student loan repayment system, which slashed payments and ensured that most borrowers would never repay their loans in full, are likely to be reversed. But both the House and Senate plans do include some carrots for borrowers to ensure that they can pay down their debts, such as assistance in covering interest costs. And when students can't pay back their loans, we're likely to see increased efforts to force colleges to bear that cost rather than taxpayers. One idea is to essentially require colleges to co-sign their students' loans. So if students can't pay, the college has to make the government whole. The idea here is not to punish colleges, but to give colleges an incentive to ensure that their graduates' debt burdens are affordable. That could mean reducing prices so students don't have to borrow as much, or closing down programs with a low return on investment, such as that master's degree in film that I mentioned earlier. Now, I've thrown a lot of information at you just now, so I'll stop there, but I'll look forward to your questions. Oh, I can just call on people, that's fine. Right here. It's a great question. The question was about getting rid of the Department of Education, as President Trump proposed on the campaign trail more than once. So this whole idea of getting rid of the Department of Education could really mean a lot of things. There's a whole spectrum of what getting rid of the Department of Education might actually mean. So at one end of the spectrum, it's a purely cosmetic move where you say, we're getting rid of the Department of Education, but now we're creating a new Office of Education at the US Treasury Department. And basically everybody just moves a few blocks over in their office building and nothing really changes. At the complete other end of the spectrum is we get the federal government out of education entirely. We return education to being a purely state and local issue. And what that might involve would be potentially block granting Title I and Pell Grants and other major sources of federal funding for education to the states, just saying to states, here's a big chunk of money, use it as you see fit. In that case, the federal government might still step in to do things like civil rights enforcement and disability rights enforcement, but by and large, the federal bureaucracy at the education department would disappear, and education would be going back to be a purely state and local issue.
For future questions, we ask that you take the microphone so that we can all hear you. And I can help deliver it to you.
Thank you so much for your remarks. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us this evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question has to do with, it's kind of ducktailing off of that a little bit. When you're thinking about the potential closure and adjustments to the Department of Education, a lot of that deals with the gutting of funding that helps to serve our most marginalized communities. So if you can provide any insight onto what some of those realities might look like for our marginalized communities in light of that potential reality.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the big question. I mean, we say get rid of the education department, but what really matters is the money, and what happens to the money, where does the money go? I don't think there is that much appetite on the Hill to get rid of the money for the most part. I think, pretty much every member of Congress probably has some Title I school in their district. Every member of Congress has a college in their district, or at least most do, that is probably getting some Pell Grant money. So there's not a huge appetite to just cut that funding entirely. What I think there is an appetite for is to cut out the federal bureaucracy, which many people see is the education department imposing that on schools and colleges. There's an old joke that, you know, the education department is 10% of the funding and 50% of the paperwork. And I think a lot of a lot of folks will say, well, we might want to keep the money, block grant it to the states, but potentially get rid of 400 Maryland Avenue and just let the state governments deal with it.
Hi, thank you for coming and speaking with us today. You talked about block grants like Title I going to the states and being a big chunk of money that they will use as they see fit. Do you see any rules and regulations for accountability coming from the federal government attached to that money, or nothing at all?
Well, I'm not sure they've quite gotten that far, but it is. I think the point of the block grant, though, would be that if you're going to get this money, that's probably going to be very few strings attached. Of course, you'd still have to abide by things like, you know, the Federal Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I think the idea would be to just let the states do with that money as they see fit and come up with their own accountability policies for the schools within their borders.
Hi, thank you for being here with us. I was wondering if you had any insight into what trends we're going to see at the local level, specifically if you think there's going to be an increase in mayoral control or an increase in school board politics that have started in some states, if we're going to see that expand in their control over the local governments.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I think that it's a bit more of a K-12 question, which I am definitely not an expert in. But you know, I have been struck over the last 4 years by how you know, school board races have become much more higher profile. And I think, you know, there's some upsides and downsides to that. But I think it is, you know, a very fascinating development, and you know, potentially something that will continue. People realize that, you know, national politics do affect what's going on in their classroom, and a lot of parents are. During COVID, saw what was going on in their kids' classroom because their classroom became their living room, and you know, that wasn't necessarily what they expected, and it wasn't necessarily up to their standards. So it is possible that we'll continue to see you know, greater engagement, greater involvement in those local elections from an education perspective going forward.
Hello, thank you so much for being here today. My question is, with the proposed changes to Title IX, how do you see that affecting education, wherever you feel comfortable talking about that one?
You guys are asking me questions outside my area of expertise, but you know, Title IX is not really an issue that I've engaged too much in. I would be waiting to see, you know, what are the results of these lawsuits that have been filed that have been filed against the Biden administration and their Title IX regulations. But we'll also just have to see if the new Department of Education is going to re-regulate this and what they propose. So I would say it's still probably going to be a little while before we have some clarity on that one. Right here.
Hi, thank you for being here. I was wondering, there's clearly an appetite to address student loan issues, but I was wondering if you could speak to any appetite around addressing the rising cost of higher education, and what that might look like in the next 4 years.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that is really a #1 issue on the Republican side, that the sweeping bill, which I referred to earlier, which has been introduced in the House, is called the College Cost Reduction Act. You know, that is the focus that they want to have on higher education. And there's a number of ways that the bill kind of gets at, you know, college cost reduction. I mean, one part of it is putting limits on student loans. There's some research showing that increased student loan availability is passed through to colleges, and colleges tend to raise tuition when they're able to get more loans from taxpayers, so putting some limits on that. And another is the co-signing issue that I referred to earlier. So having colleges co-sign the loans that students are taking out, essentially, so that if students are unable to pay them back because the value of their education is not in line with the costs they paid, the college is going to be on the hook for that. And the college then would have one of two choices if it wants to avoid those penalties. It could either reduce its prices so that the the cost of the education is in line with the value it's producing, or it could say, you know, this is the students in this program are just earning too little to pay back their loans. We're going to have to we're going to have to try and find ways to increase their earnings, either through better career services or potentially offering different kinds of majors that have more labor market relevance. And sometimes that might involve just closing down some programs that don't have a return on investment.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. You must have known that this would not be a great environment for a lot of these comments. I'm an alum of Teachers College, graduated in 2019, and I did this program as well. My question is about something Professor Kagan mentioned, which is the deprofessionalization of higher education. From your perspective, we're seeing a lot of people appointed to high positions at the Department of Education who don't have education experience, never worked in a school. What are the benefits of that, do you think, and what are some of the cons?
Well, I would say the Department of Education is a little bit of a misnomer because it's really the nation's 5th largest consumer bank. Running the $1.6 trillion student loan portfolio, which has been a colossal mess these last 4 or 5 years. I mean, we went back to a return to repayment back in October 2023, but that wasn't really a return to repayment because if you didn't pay your loans, there weren't actually any consequences. Now there are going to start to be some consequences, and it'll probably be laid bare right around January 20th that a lot of people are not paying back their loans. A lot of people are becoming delinquent and being in danger of defaulting on their loans. The other big issue we're seeing right now is the FAFSA debacle. I mean, so the Biden administration completely bollocks this up. They were given 3.5 years to simplify the FAFSA form, and when it launched, it was kind of a disaster. As a result, freshman enrollment this past fall plummeted by 5%, even though it had been on an upswing in the previous years. At institutions serving high percentages of Pell students, enrollment dropped by more than 10%. So these are kind of two twin crises that are going to have to be resolved. And I think for those crises, you probably want somebody with a lot of administrative experience. I mean, Linda McMahon, we'll have to see how she performs in office, but I mean, she has experience running a large business. She has experience running the Small Business Administration. I do think that there's a case for having somebody in that position who's a manager, who's going to define clear goals and really try to get things done.
Hi, sorry, I'm back again, and then I'll pass the mic. But my question was pertaining to Professor Kagan mentioned in her speech, and we've talked about this week, that bipartisan movement might see more in the career and vocational education sector. What kind of changes can you see to vocational schools? And I know you talked a lot about very expensive institutions like Columbia, but what kind of reforms can you see to community colleges occurring under the Trump administration?
That's a great question. So, according to recent data from the National Student Clearinghouse, we've seen community college enrollment drop significantly since the pandemic. Among community colleges that are focused on transfer to four-year institutions, enrollment has dropped 20%. But among schools that have a more vocational orientation, enrollment in those community colleges has actually risen and is above its pre-pandemic level. So I think students are starting to vote with their feet. You know, they're starting to move towards schools which can promise them a direct pathway into the labor force and a higher paying job rather than the uncertain pathway through transfer to a bachelor's degree. And I think a lot of policymakers on both sides of the aisle are very interested in supporting this trend. So the Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act, that rare part aspect of bipartisanship. It was introduced in the last Congress by Virginia Foxx and Bobby Scott, who are the top Republican and Democrat on the House Education Committee. That would expand Pell Grants to short-term programs, which can demonstrate a significant increase in earnings for their graduates. We might see some version of that pass in the next Congress. We might see more support for apprenticeships as well. I'm not sure we're going to go full Germany and fully integrate that into our education system, but we might see more steps to try and support apprenticeships, such as allowing Pell Grants to be used for the classroom components of apprenticeships, potentially expanding work study so that could be used to top up apprentices' wages while they're working. There are a number of options on the table, and I think that there is going to be some bipartisan interest in expanding those.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to allow for our last question for tonight.
So you mentioned the person who's going to be heading up the Department of Education, have business and administration. How do you think that's going to play out since she does not have a lot of education experience? moving forward in terms of running such a large department, as you said, with lots of money?
Yes. Well, I think, as I said before, what you really want for this moment is not necessarily somebody who's been a lifelong educator, but somebody who's an administrator, who knows how to run a large organization, who has experience doing so. I don't personally know Linda McMahon, so I can't speak to her personally, but I am optimistic that she will be able to, take charge of what is right now a very chaotic organization and hopefully restore some semblance of order. But I think a lot also depends on her picking good staff to be under her. So I think the position of undersecretary has yet to be announced. I think for that position, you'll probably want, somebody who might have more experience in the education world, who knows the policy very well, and hopefully those two together as a team can make some real positive change. Any other questions, or am I out of time? I'm out of time. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Preston for sharing your perspective with us this evening, and to all of you for joining us tonight. We're excited to visit our DC area alumni, friends, and with all of you here. We have flyers with information on how to stay connected with the college, whether that's through our civic engagement, TC Take Action, Alumni Association area groups, upcoming events, and other ways. We ask you to continue to mix and mingle as we start to depart for tonight, and thank you again to everyone.